The diner parking lot was thick with the smell of gasoline and impending violence. Jackson "Brick" Miller sat astride his customized Harley, the engine's idle a deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the cracked asphalt. He was a man who minded his own business, a heavily tattooed enforcer for a notorious motorcycle club. But when the terrified little girl being dragged toward a rusty sedan locked eyes with him, everything changed. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Instead, her trembling hands frantically formed the signs he hadn't used since his own sister passed away. Help. He's not my dad. The Mojave Desert in mid-July is an unforgiving place. The heat doesn't just warm you, it suffocates you, pressing down like a physical weight. Heat waves shimmered violently off the blacktop of Route 66, distorting the horizon into a watery mirage. Sitting off the shoulder of this desolate stretch, about 50 miles outside of Barstow, was the Rusty Spoon Diner. It was a relic of the 1970s, a faded aluminum tube that smelled eternally of burned coffee, old frying oil, and desperate transient lives. Jackson Miller, known to everyone in the underworld simply as Brick, sat in the corner booth facing the door. He was a mountain of a man, his arms thick like bridge cables and covered in a tapestry of faded prison ink and fresh club tattoos. His heavy leather cut, bearing the three-piece patch of the Iron Syndicate Motorcycle Club, rested on the vinyl seat beside him. Brick was on a solo run, putting miles between himself and the club headquarters in Los Angeles after a brutal internal dispute over turf lines. He needed the wind, the isolation, and the mindless hum of his V-twin engine to clear his head. He was finishing his third cup of black coffee when the bell above the glass door chimed, cutting through the low hum of the ceiling fans. A man and a little girl walked in. Immediately, the hair on the back of Brick's neck stood up. After 20 years of riding with outlaws, surviving prison riots, and navigating the darkest corners of the criminal underworld, Brick had developed a sixth sense for prey and predators. And the man who had just walked in was sweating like a predator who knew he was being hunted. The man looked to be in his late 40s. Let's call him Greg Harrison, though the name on the credit card he would later use was undoubtedly a forgery. Greg wore a rumpled gray suit that looked completely out of place in the desert heat. His tie was loosened, his collar stained with nervous perspiration. His eyes darted around the diner, registering the sleepy trucker at the counter, the teenage waitress named Brenda, wiping down a table, and finally, Brick in the corner. Greg's gaze lingered on the biker for a fraction of a second before he quickly looked away, his jaw tightening. But it was the little girl who captured Brick's attention. She looked to be about 8 years old. She wore a faded pink sundress that was at least 2 sizes too big for her, threatening to slip off her frail shoulders. Her blonde hair was a tangled, matted mess, and there were dark, heavy bags under her pale blue eyes. She didn't walk beside the man. She was practically being dragged. Greg had a vice-like grip on her upper arm, his knuckles white with the force he was exerting. "Sit down," Greg hissed, shoving her into a booth near the bathrooms, as far away from the large windows as possible. The girl didn't make a sound. She didn't cry out when she bumped against the hard formica table. She just stared down at her lap, her body completely rigid. Brenda, the waitress, walked over with 2 laminated menus, popping her chewing gum. "What can I get ya, hun?" "Just a black coffee to go, and whatever prepackaged muffin you have," Greg snapped, his voice tight. "We're in a hurry." "Suit yourself," Brenda muttered, turning away. Brick watched them over the rim of his ceramic mug. He watched the way Greg kept checking his watch, the way he kept glancing out the window at his dusty 4-door sedan, parked haphazardly in the lot. But more than that, Brick watched the girl. She was entirely mute. When Greg handed her the blueberry muffin wrapped in plastic, she didn't open it. She just held it in her lap. She looked exhausted, broken, completely defeated. Yet, when Greg turned his head to watch Brenda fetch the coffee, the girl slowly raised her eyes. She looked around the diner, her gaze sweeping past the trucker, past the empty stools, until she locked eyes with the giant, bearded man in the corner booth. Brick didn't look away. He held her gaze. It was a heavy, solemn look. The girl's chest heaved, her eyes widened, pleading, filled with a sudden, desperate terror. She knew Greg wasn't looking. She knew this was her only window. Slowly, carefully, she brought her small hands up to her chest. She tapped her thumb to her forehead, spreading her fingers. Then, she brought her hand down, shaking her head subtly. Father. No. Then, she placed her closed fist on top of her flat palm and raised them both together. Help. Finally, she pointed a trembling finger to her chest. Me. Brick felt a cold shockwave hit his system, completely obliterating the desert heat. He froze, his hand tightening around his coffee mug so hard the thick ceramic threatened to crack. He's not my dad. Help me. Brick knew American Sign Language. It was a secret he kept buried deep, a vulnerable part of a man who made his living projecting invulnerability. His younger sister, Sarah, had been born completely deaf. Growing up in a fractured, abusive household, ASL was their secret language, TV, their way of communicating when their father was in a drunken rage. Sarah had died of leukemia when she was 14, and Brick hadn't signed a single word since the day he buried her. Seeing those specific, desperate motions from the terrified girl in the oversized sundress felt like a ghost reaching out from the grave and grabbing him by the throat. Greg abruptly stood up, snatching the paper coffee cup from Brenda's tray and tossing a crumpled $20 bill onto the table. Let's go, he barked, grabbing the girl's arm again. The girl flinched violently, her eyes darting back to Brick one last time before she was yanked toward the diner's exit. Brick didn't think. He didn't weigh the consequences. The ruthless enforcer of the Iron Syndicate vanished, replaced by the protective older brother who had failed to save his own sister. He stood up, his massive 6'4" frame towering over the booths. He grabbed his leather cut and moved with a terrifying, silent speed. Just as Greg pushed the heavy glass door open, dragging the girl out into the blistering heat, a massive, heavy boot slammed against the glass, snapping the door shut with a deafening crack. Greg stumbled backward, startled. He spun around to find a wall of denim, leather, and muscle blocking his exit. "Is there a problem, buddy?" Greg asked, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to puff out his chest. Brick looked down at him, his eyes dead and cold. Let go of the girl's arm. "Excuse me?" Greg sputtered, his face flushing red. "This is my daughter. She's throwing a tantrum. It's none of your damn business, you overgrown thug. Get out of my way." "She didn't make a sound," Brick rumbled, his voice so deep it vibrated in the small entryway. "Not a single peep. And she just told me you aren't her father." Greg's eyes widened in genuine panic, a flash of pure terror that confirmed everything Brick suspected. But Greg recovered quickly, masking his fear with loud, righteous indignation. "Are you insane? I don't have to explain myself to some biker trash. Let me pass, or I'm calling the police." "Call them," Brick challenged, crossing his massive arms. He looked down at the little girl. He brought his large, calloused hands up and signed slowly, deliberately. "I am here. You are safe." The girl gasped. A single tear broke loose and tracked through the dirt on her cheek. She nodded frantically. "What are you doing? Stop waving your hands at her!" Greg yelled, violently pulling the girl behind him. "Brenda! Hey, waitress! Call the cops! This lunatic is harassing us." Brenda, looking terrified, had already picked up the landline behind the counter. "I'm calling the sheriff's department," she yelled back, her voice trembling. "Good," Brick said, his tone entirely flat. He didn't move an inch. He stood there for 15 agonizing minutes, a silent sentinel blocking the door. Greg paced nervously, sweating profusely, occasionally yelling insults at Brick, but never daring to physically move the giant biker. The little girl stayed huddled behind Greg, her eyes fixed on Brick's boots. The wail of a siren finally cut through the desert silence. A white and green San Bernardino County Sheriff's SUV pulled into the gravel lot, lights flashing. Officer Pete Evans stepped out. He was a veteran cop, tired, cynical, and immediately biased the second he saw the scene. He saw a well-dressed man holding a crying child, being cornered by a massive, heavily tattooed outlaw biker wearing gang colors. The narrative wrote itself in the cop's mind. "All right, back it up," Officer Evans barked, unsnapping his holster as he approached the door. "Hands where I can see them, big guy. Step away from the door." Brick slowly raised his hands and stepped back. allowing Greg and the girl out into the sunlight. "Officer, thank God," Greg practically sobbed, putting on a masterful performance. "This man, he wouldn't let us leave. He's psychotic. He cornered me and my daughter. He was threatening us." Evans glared at Brick. "Is that true? You harassing citizens? Biker?" "Ask him for his ID," Brick said calmly. "Then ask the girl who he is. She's deaf. She signed to me that he's not her father. She has selective mutism from trauma, officer." Greg interjected quickly, pulling a leather wallet from his jacket. He handed over a California driver's license. "My name is Gregory Harrison. This is my daughter, Lily. We're driving down to Phoenix to see a specialist. My wife passed away last year. It's been hard on her. She hasn't spoken in months." Officer Evans inspected the ID. It looked flawless. It matched the man's face. He then watched as Greg pulled out his smartphone, swiping through his photo gallery and holding it out to the cop. "Here, family photos. From Christmas. From her birthday." Brick couldn't see the screen, but he saw the cop's face soften. Evans nodded, handing the phone and ID back. "All right, Mr. Harrison. I'm sorry for the trouble." Evans turned to Brick, his expression hardening into pure contempt. "As for you, I know exactly what the Iron Syndicate is. You boys run meth and guns out of LA. I don't want your kind bringing trouble to my county. You're lucky he isn't pressing charges for false imprisonment." "He's lying," Brick insisted, his voice rising, a dangerous edge creeping in. "Look at the girl, man. Look at her body language. She's terrified of him. She's terrified of you, you giant freak," Greg yelled, pulling Lily closer. Lily looked at Brick. Her hands remained at her sides, but her eyes were screaming. "One more word out of you, and I'm putting you in cuffs for disturbing the peace and harassment," Officer Evans warned, stepping into Brick's personal space, his hand resting on his taser. "Get on your bike and ride out of my county. Now." Brick clenched his fists. Every instinct told him to put the cop on the ground and tear Greg apart. But if he went to jail, Lily was gone forever. The system had looked at a piece of plastic and a photoshopped image on a screen and decided everything was fine. The system was blind. Brick took a deep breath, forcing his muscles to relax. "Fine," he growled. He walked over to his Harley, swung his leg over the saddle, and fired up the engine. The roar drowned out the desert wind. He watched as Greg hurriedly buckled Lily into the back seat of the gray sedan, slammed the door, and sped out of the parking lot, heading east towards the Arizona border. Officer Evans stood by his cruiser, watching Brick, making sure the biker left. Brick popped the clutch and pulled onto the highway, heading west, the opposite direction. He rode for 2 miles, watching his mirrors until the police SUV was out of sight. Then, he slammed on the brakes, tearing up the shoulder in a cloud of dust. He pulled his smartphone from his leather vest and hit a speed dial number. "Yeah, Brick?" a gruff voice answered over the Bluetooth connection in his helmet. "Rooster," Brick said, his voice cold as ice. "Where are you in Dutch?" "We're about 20 miles behind you, just past the State Line way station. What's up?" "You sound tense." "I need you boys to open up your throttles. I'm turning around. There's a gray 4-door sedan, California plates, heading east on 40. We're going to hunt it down." "A civilian?" "Brick, what the hell is going on?" Brick stared at the empty highway ahead of him, the image of Lily's desperate sign language burning in his mind. "We're going to save a little girl," Brick said, "and we're going to bury the man who took her." The wind tore at Brick's leather vest as he pushed the Harley past 90 miles an hour, flying eastward back down Route 40. The desert landscape blurred into streaks of brown and dull green. His mind was calculating, cold, and precise. Greg Harrison had a solid 15-minute head start. Assuming the sedan was pushing 80, it would take Brick 20 to 30 miles to close the gap. 15 minutes later, the roar of twin engines echoed behind him. In his rearview mirror, Brick saw the familiar headlights of 2 heavy cruisers rapidly approaching. It was James Rooster Sullivan and William Dutch Vandenberg. Rooster was the club's road captain, a tactical genius on 2 wheels, and Dutch was a heavy hitter, a man built like a brick wall with a notoriously short temper. They pulled up alongside Brick, perfectly pacing him at 95 miles an hour, 3 dark knights riding side by side on the desolate asphalt. Through the synchronized helmet comms, Rooster's voice crackled. "Talk to us, brother. We risk federal heat running down a civilian car. You sure about this?" "I'm sure," Brick replied, raising his voice over the wind. "Guy in a suit. Has a little girl, maybe 8 years old. Claimed he was her dad, had a fake ID, and a cop who bought the story. But she's deaf, Rooster. She signed to me. He's trafficking her." A heavy silence fell over the comms, broken only by the static of the wind. Even among outlaws, men who dealt in violence and illicit trades, there were strict codes. Women and children were off limits. To the Iron Syndicate, a man who preyed on children wasn't just a criminal, he was a rabid dog that needed to be put down. "Say less?" Dutch's voice rumbled, dark and lethal. "What's the play?" "We box him in," Brick ordered. "It's a gray sedan. We need to force him off the road before he hits the Arizona border. If he crosses state lines and hits the grid in Phoenix, she's gone." They rode in a tight wedge formation, scanning the horizon. 10 minutes later, Rooster spotted it. 2 miles up. Left lane. Gray 4-door, Rooster called out. Brick leaned forward, twisting the throttle. The Harley roared, launching him forward like a missile. As they approached, Brick recognized the dents on the rear bumper. It was Greg. "All right, listen up," Brick commanded over the comms. "Rooster, take the left flank. Keep him from crossing the median. Dutch, you take the right. Do not let him exit. I'm taking the front. We slow him down, we box him in, we force him onto the shoulder. Watch the kid, do not cause a rollover." "Copy that." The 3 bikers swarmed the sedan like angry hornets. Rooster pulled up along the driver's side, matching the car's speed perfectly. He drifted his bike inches from the sedan's doors, revving his engine violently. Dutch did the same on the passenger side. Inside the car, Greg Harrison panicked. He jerked the steering wheel, but Rooster held his ground, forcing Greg to correct back into his lane. Greg laid on the horn, his face twisted in fear and rage behind the glass. In the back seat, Brick caught a fleeting glimpse of Lily, huddled into a ball, hands covering her ears. Brick accelerated, pulling ahead of the sedan, then quickly dropped into the lane directly in front of Greg's bumper. He let off the throttle, engine braking. The heavy Harley slowed dramatically. Greg slammed on his brakes to avoid rear-ending the massive bike. The sedan's tires squealed, smoking on the hot asphalt as the car swerved. Rooster and Dutch pinched in tighter, leaving Greg nowhere to go but the dusty shoulder of the highway. The sedan slid onto the dirt, kicking up a massive cloud of sand and gravel before finally shuddering to a halt. The 3 bikers instantly circled the car, cutting their engines and kicking down their kickstands. The silence of the desert rushed back in, heavy and pregnant with violence. Brick dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He pulled his thick leather riding gloves tight over his knuckles. The knuckles of the gloves were reinforced with titanium plates, a tool of his trade. "Keep an eye on the highway," Brick told his brothers. "Anyone comes, flag them past." He walked toward the driver's side door. Inside, Greg was frantically scrambling, hitting the central locking button. Click. The doors locked. Greg fumbled under his seat, searching for something. Brick didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for the window to be rolled down. He planted his boots, drew his right fist back, and drove his titanium-plated knuckles directly into the driver's side window. The reinforced glass exploded inward with a deafening crash, showering Greg in jagged diamonds. Greg screamed, shielding his face, blood welling from a dozen tiny cuts. Before Greg could recover, Brick reached through the shattered window, grabbed the man by his expensive silk tie, and violently hauled him toward the door. Brick used his other hand to unlock the door from the inside, ripped it open, and dragged Greg out of the car, throwing him onto the dirt like a rag doll. Dutch moved in instantly, putting a heavy steel-toed boot squarely on Greg's chest, pinning him to the ground. "Move a muscle, suit, and I crush your ribs," Dutch growled. Brick ignored the man on the ground and immediately moved to the back seat. He opened the rear door. Lily was pressed as far back into the opposite corner as possible, trembling violently, staring at the shattered glass and the giant men in leather. Brick took off his helmet, dropping it onto the desert floor. He pulled off his threatening titanium gloves. He knelt down so he was eye level with the little girl, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He raised his hands and signed, smoothly and gently. "You are safe now. Bad man is stopped." Lily stared at him, her chest heaving. Slowly, she uncurled herself. She raised trembling hands. "Thank you." "Rooster!" Brick called out, his eyes never leaving the girl. "Search the car, glove box, trunk, under the seats. We need to know who this guy really is." "Please, listen to me," Greg gasped from the dirt, struggling under Dutch's boot. "You don't understand what you're doing. I'm trying to save her." Brick turned his head, his eyes narrowing. Save her from what? By dragging her across state lines? By lying to a cop? "She's my niece!" Greg yelled, blood trickling down his chin. "My sister's kid. Her father, the guy who had custody, he's not a normal guy. He's cartel. Sinaloa." He found out she's deaf, decided she was defective, and was going to sell her to pay off a shipment he lost. "I took her. I forged the papers to get her out of California." Brick froze. The desert air suddenly felt a lot colder. "He's got something in the trunk." "Brick," Rooster called out from the back of the car. He had popped the trunk and was rummaging through a black duffel bag. Rooster walked over, holding 2 items. In one hand, he held a thick stack of passports, 5 different countries, all featuring Greg's face with different names. In the other hand, he held a sleek, silenced 9mm pistol and a satellite phone. "Looks like our boy Greg here is a ghost," Rooster said, dropping the passports onto Greg's chest. "Nobody trying to just save their niece needs burn identities in 5 languages and a wet-work pistol." Brick stood up, towering over Greg. "Lie to me again," Brick whispered dangerously. "Tell me you're just a concerned uncle." Greg's face turned ghostly pale. The facade was entirely broken. He looked at the guns, the passports, and then at the 3 massive bikers who had him dead to rights in the middle of nowhere. "I'm a courier," Greg finally whispered, his voice trembling. "A private contractor. I move high-value assets for clients who pay quietly and extremely well." "And the girl?" Brick asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Who is the client?" "You don't want to know," Greg choked out. "I swear to God, you bikers think you're tough, but the people who bought her, they own politicians. They own armies. If you take her, they won't just kill you. They will eradicate your entire club." Brick looked back into the car. Lily was watching him. She didn't hear the threats. She didn't understand the gravity of the cartel, or the syndicates, or the shadow organizations this man was talking about. All she knew was that the scary giant who spoke her silent language had stopped the monster who took her. Brick turned back to Greg. A dark, terrifying smile crept across the biker's scarred face. "Good," Brick said softly. "Let them come." He looked at Dutch and Rooster. "Tie him up. Throw him in the trunk. We're taking him and the girl back to the clubhouse." It's time the Iron Syndicate went to war. The Iron Syndicate's Los Angeles headquarters was a fortress disguised as a dilapidated auto salvage yard in San Pedro. Corrugated steel walls, topped with razor wire and high-resolution security cameras, shielded the inner courtyard from prying eyes. When Brick, Rooster, and Dutch roared through the heavy mechanical gates, they weren't just bringing home a kidnapped child, they were dragging a lit fuse into an armory. They pulled the gray sedan into a massive garage bay, out of sight of any aerial surveillance or street-level informants. As the heavy steel doors rolled shut, plunging the space into the glow of fluorescent shop lights, 6 patched members stepped out of the shadows. These were hardened men, veterans of road wars and federal indictments, their leather cuts adorned with the 1% diamond patch. "Get Mama Red," Brick barked to a young prospect scrubbing engine grease off a workbench. "Tell her we have a priority guest, a child." The prospect sprinted toward the main clubhouse. Brick opened the rear door of the sedan. Lily was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide as she took in the towering, heavily armed men surrounding the car. Brick dropped to one knee, ignoring the grime on the concrete floor, and raised his hands. "We are home. My friends will protect you," he signed, his movements deliberate and calming. "No one will hurt you here." Lily hesitated, then unbuckled her seatbelt. She slid out of the car, her tiny hand gripping the edge of Brick's heavy leather vest. She stayed practically glued to his leg as Mama Red, a formidable, silver-haired matriarch who had spent 40 years managing the club's legitimate bookkeeping and patching up its wounded, bustled into the garage. "Lord have mercy, Brick," Mama Red breathed, taking in the bruised, exhausted little girl. "What did you drag into our yard?" "She needs food, a shower, and a safe room." "Mama," Brick said softly. "Her name is Lily. She's deaf. Keep her away from the basement." Mama Red nodded, her expression hardening with maternal resolve. She approached Lily slowly, offering a warm smile and a packaged granola bar. Lily looked up at Brick, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, the girl released his vest and took Mama Red's hand, disappearing into the residential wing of the compound. Once the heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, the atmosphere in the garage shifted from protective to lethal. "Pop the trunk," Brick ordered Dutch. Dutch unlatched the trunk, revealing a bound, gagged, and thoroughly terrified Greg Harrison. The club members hauled him out by his collar, dragging his battered frame toward the freight elevator that led to the soundproofed basement, a space usually reserved for extracting confessions from rival gang members and rats. They strapped Greg to a heavy steel chair bolted to the concrete floor. Brick stood in the corner, arms crossed, while Rooster laid out the fake passports, the silenced pistol, and the satellite phone on a rolling metal tray. "Let's skip the preamble," Rooster said, pulling a heavy tactical knife from his belt and using it to clean his fingernails. "We ran the IMEI on your sat phone. You've been making encrypted calls to a private server hub in Belize. We also ran the serial numbers on your little 9mm. It's tied to an old federal armory theft down in Texas, remnants of the ATF's disastrous Operation Fast and Furious. You're swimming in deep, highly illegal waters, Greg. So who is the buyer?" Greg spat a mouthful of blood onto the concrete. "You bikers are out of your depth. You think you're bad because you run some meth and extort a few local dive bars? The people I work for buy and sell governments. You kill me, you keep the girl, and they will send a paramilitary strike team to level this junkyard." Dutch stepped forward, his fist winding up, but Brick raised a hand, stopping him. Brick walked slowly into the center of the room, dragging a metal folding chair. He sat backward on it, inches from Greg's face. "When I was a kid," Brick began, his voice a low, terrifying rumble, "my old man used to beat me and my sister. He thought he was untouchable. He thought because he was bigger, he made the rules. You remind me of him. Arrogant. Cruel. Hiding behind power." Brick leaned in close, his cold eyes burning into Greg's. "I'm not going to torture you, Greg. I'm going to make you a promise. You tell me who the buyer is, and I hand you over to the feds. You don't, and I hand you over to the Mexican cartels you stole this girl from and let them skin you alive for losing their merchandise." Greg's arrogance faltered. The color drained from his face. He knew the cartels. He knew what they did to couriers who failed. "It's a syndicate out of Nevada," Greg whispered, his voice cracking. "A broker named Arthur Sterling. He operates a legitimate private security firm in Vegas, but his real money comes from human trafficking, high-end clientele, untraceable auctions. The girl was a special order. She's completely silent, easy to hide, easy to control." "Where was the drop?" Brick demanded. "Tomorrow night, 2 a.m., Greg choked out. "An abandoned airstrip in the Mojave, near the Ivanpah solar facility. Sterling's men are supposed to meet me, take the girl, and wire the second half of my payment." Brick stood up, knocking the folding chair over. He looked at Rooster. "Get the feds on a burner phone. The incorruptible ones we use when we need to tip off a rival's shipment. Give them Sterling's name and the airstrip coordinates. Tell them to bring the HRT." "And us?" Dutch asked, a dangerous grin spreading across his face. Brick cracked his knuckles. "We're going to the desert. We're going to make sure Sterling's men don't leave that airstrip." The Mojave Desert, at 1:30 a.m., was a sea of ink-black darkness, illuminated only by the cold, indifferent light of a crescent moon. The Ivanpah solar facility loomed in the distance like an alien monument, while the abandoned airstrip stretched out like a dead scar across the sand. Two black, armored Cadillac Escalades rolled down the cracked asphalt, their headlights cutting through the swirling dust. They came to a halt near the center of the runway, engines purring aggressively. 4 men stepped out. They weren't street thugs. They were highly trained mercenaries, wearing tactical gear, carrying suppressed compact assault rifles. In the center of the runway, illuminated by their high beams, sat Greg's gray sedan. The lead mercenary, a scarred man holding a heavy flashlight, approached the car cautiously. He signaled for his men to fan out. He tapped on the driver's side window. Inside, Greg sat behind the wheel, his hands zip-tied to the steering wheel, a piece of duct tape over his mouth. His eyes were wide, terrified, frantically looking back and forth. The mercenary frowned, lowering his rifle slightly. "What the hell is this?" he muttered into his radio headset. He reached out to pull the door handle. A single, blinding spotlight snapped on from the darkness of a rusted airplane hangar 100 yards away. It pinned the mercenaries in a circle of harsh white light. Before the mercenaries could raise their weapons, the desert erupted in a deafening mechanical roar. From the scrub brush, from behind the hangar, from the dry washes flanking the runway, 30 heavy Harley-Davidson motorcycles roared to life simultaneously. The sound was apocalyptic, a wall of thunder that shook the ground. The Iron Syndicate had surrounded them. Bikers dismounted in perfect synchronization, taking cover behind their heavy iron machines, leveling high-powered hunting rifles and modified shotguns at the center of the runway. Brick stepped out of the shadows of the hangar, a heavy pump-action shotgun resting casually against his shoulder. He walked into the edge of the light, completely exposed, completely unafraid. "Drop the rifles!" Brick's voice boomed over the idling motorcycle engines, echoing across the desolate strip. "You're boxed in. You have 3 seconds to surrender before we turn those SUVs into Swiss cheese." The lead mercenary sneered, raising his rifle toward Brick. "You dirty bikers think you can take on an elite contractor unit? We'll wipe you out." "Look up, idiot!" Rooster's voice yelled from the darkness. The mercenary paused. A low, rhythmic thumping filled the air, rapidly growing louder. Suddenly, the sky above them was illuminated by the blinding wash of helicopter searchlights. 2 FBI hostage rescue team Black Hawk helicopters descended rapidly from the night sky, kicking up a massive sandstorm. Over a loudspeaker, a federal agent's voice boomed, "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Drop your weapons and get on the ground. Lethal force is authorized." Simultaneously, a dozen unmarked federal SUVs tore onto the airstrip from the access road, blue and red strobes flashing violently, completely blocking the Escalade's escape route. The mercenaries looked at the bikers, heavily entrenched and ready to die, and then at the heavily armed federal agents rappelling from the helicopters. The math was simple. They dropped their rifles, raising their hands in surrender. Brick watched as the FBI swarmed the mercenaries, throwing them to the asphalt and zip-tying their wrists. Federal agents surrounded Greg's car, cutting him loose and immediately placing him under arrest for kidnapping, federal trafficking, and a litany of other charges. Rooster had planted all of Greg's burn passports and the illegal firearm on the passenger seat for the feds to find. An FBI negotiator, a man Brick had fed information to in the past, walked over to the edge of the perimeter where Brick stood. "You cut it close this time, Brick," the agent said, lowering his weapon. "We raided Sterling's compound in Vegas 10 minutes ago. Found his ledgers. The whole sick ring is coming down tonight." "And the girl?" Brick asked, his voice rough. "Child Protective Services is waiting for her in L.A., but not the standard system. We're placing her in a specialized foster home for deaf trauma victims. She's going to be completely off the grid, safe and protected." "You did good, biker." Brick nodded once. He didn't need a medal. He turned his back on the flashing lights and walked back to his customized Harley. He swung his leg over the saddle, feeling the familiar, comforting rumble of the V-twin engine as he fired it up. A few days later, a small, unmarked package arrived at the Iron Syndicate's San Pedro compound. Inside was a simple piece of heavy cardstock paper. On it, drawn in bright pink crayon, was a picture of a giant, bearded man standing next to a tiny girl. Beneath the drawing, written in shaky handwriting, were 2 words: "Thank you." Brick folded the paper carefully, tucking it into the inner pocket of his heavy leather cut, right over his heart. He walked out to the yard, kicked his bike into gear, and rode out toward the Pacific Coast Highway, the wind finally washing the ghosts from his mind. What an incredible, heart-stopping ride. From a tense encounter in a desolate diner to a full-blown war in the Mojave Desert, Brick and the Iron Syndicate proved that true heroism often comes from the most unlikely places. They risked their freedom and their lives to protect a little girl who couldn't speak for herself, dismantling a dark, high-power syndicate in the process. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the toughest exteriors hide the most protective hearts. If this thrilling story of redemption, fierce loyalty, and outlaw justice kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this incredible tale with your friends to spread the word about standing up for the vulnerable, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping, real-life stories full of drama and twists. See you in the next video.
Hi, my name is Dominant Flame Escrow, the owner and manager of King's Obsession Concord. After watching the video, "He's not my dad," the deaf girl signed, the biker revved and took a stand. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the courage it took for someone to speak their truth and for another person to step up when it mattered most. Beneath the tension and drama, I felt the story was really about protection, trust, and the importance of being heard. Sometimes the people who seem the toughest on the outside are the ones most willing to stand beside someone who feels vulnerable or overlooked. Do you think it takes more courage to ask for help or to step in and help someone else? And have you ever seen a moment where one person's decision completely changed the outcome of a difficult situation? Stories like this remind me that paying attention to others and standing up for what's right can make a bigger difference than we realize. If this story connected with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy heartfelt biker stories with strong characters and meaningful moments, feel free to like and subscribe for more whenever you'd like.